Welcome back to the deep dive.
Mhm.
Today we are unpacking a really fascinating and I got to say pretty intense profile by a Dr. Cornell Overbeek. It's titled The Boomer Doomer, The Pathophysiology, Diagnosis, and Treatment of a Personality Disorder.
And we should probably say right up front, because of that title.
Yeah, I want to be really clear. This is not a bash fest.
Not at all.
All
And
right.
it's definitely not 20 minutes of okay boomer jokes.
Yeah.
What Dr. Overbeek is doing here is clinical. He's building a psychological profile of a specific mindset, one that isn't just grumpy, it's not old-fashioned, it's structurally organized around pessimism.
Structurally organized around pessimism.
Oh.
I mean, that is the key hook for me.
Yeah.
We aren't talking about someone having a bad day or, just disliking modern music.
Yeah.
We're talking about a worldview where fear isn't a bug in the software. It's the operating system.
Precisely. And our mission in this deep dive is to figure out why. We want to move past the stereotype, the angry older relative shouting at the TV, and actually understand the mechanisms under the hood. We're talking biology, we're talking culture, even spirituality.
Because for the boomer doomer, that fear provides the one thing they crave most. So let's get into the timeline. To understand this character, this watchman on the wall, Dr. Overbeek says we have to start with the cultural inversion. Basically, where did they come from? They didn't come out of the womb cynical, right?
No, and that's the tragedy of it, really. Context is everything here. If you look at the historical window that generation was born into, it was unique. I mean, a period of exceptionally high trust.
The post-war era.
Exactly. Post-war prosperity, institutions were exploding in size and capability, the interstate highway system was being built. The whole narrative was one of national confidence.
It was a legible world. That's the feeling I get reading this. If you played by the rules, you move forward. The system worked.
The system worked. The future was going to be better than the present. But Overbeek calls the next phase the rupture. You have a whole generation raised on these incredibly high expectations of steady, linear progress, and then
They run headfirst into a meat grinder.
a meat grinder of institutional betrayals. You've got Vietnam, you have Watergate, the oil shocks of the 70s, where that endless prosperity suddenly felt, very fragile.
Right.
For that generation, the government lying or the economy stalling wasn't just news, it was a violation of the contract they thought they were born into.
And the crime waves, too, the 70s and 80s. I think we forget how scary that era really felt for people living in it. It
Yeah.
wasn't just headlines. It felt like the social fabric was tearing apart.
It was huge. And Overbeek introduces a critical concept here he calls learned vigilance.
Okay.
His argument is that when high expectations collide with repeated institutional failure, you don't just get disappointment, you get a permanent posture of alertness. You stop believing things will work out, and you start expecting the rug to be pulled out from under you.
It's a defense mechanism.
Yeah.
If I expect the worst, I can't be blindsided again.
Exactly. But here's where it gets interesting. This is where it shifts from just being careful to this very specific doomer profile. Overbeek writes about the mutation of that vigilance.
It stops being rational.
It becomes a filter for everything. This is that part you mentioned about the Trojan horse, right?
Yeah, that really stood out to me.
For the boomer doomer, every innovation isn't a new tool, it's a Trojan horse. Every shift in language isn't just slang, it's a sign of civilizational decay.
And they don't feel like they're being irrational.
Not at all. They feel seasoned. They think, I'm the only one who sees the con.
That's such a crucial distinction. They don't think they're paranoid. They think they're the only ones paying attention. But the source points out that the world is accelerating so fast. I mean, think about AI, social media, all of it.
Yeah.
Nobody can really keep up. But instead of admitting, hey, I'm disoriented, which is a vulnerable thing to say,
They decide the confusion is proof of malice. That's the pivot. If the world is just confusing, I feel weak, I feel old. But if the world is corrupt,
then I'm righteous. Now I'm the resistance.
exactly. It restores their sense of agency. But before we get too deep into the psychology, the source takes a turn I wasn't really expecting. We have to talk about the hardware. We have to talk about biology.
Right, the physiological substrate, because it's so easy to judge this as just a bad attitude. But Dr. Overbeek is very specific. This isn't just a choice. There are real neurobiological changes happening in the aging brain.
You cannot ignore the biology. Overbeek highlights a couple of main shifts. First, we see a pretty significant decrease in what's called dopaminergic novelty seeking.
Okay, that's a mouthful. Break that down for us.
Put simply, the brain's reward system for the new kind of breaks down. When you're young, experiencing something new, a new place, new music, it gives you a hit of dopamine. It feels like an adventure.
So your brain literally pays you to explore.
Right. but as you age, that chemical reward it fades. The new stops feeling good. But at the same time, and this is the really bad combination, your risk sensitivity goes up.
So the thrill of the unknown goes down, and the fear of the unknown goes up.
Precisely. The source has this great line. It says, in youth, the future is an adventure. In age, it is liability exposure.
Liability exposure. Wow. That perfectly captures that feeling of
Yeah.
just clutching, holding on tight because you feel like you have everything to lose.
And you add to that something called heightened threat salience. The aging brain naturally starts prioritizing danger cues over safety cues. It's evolutionary, you know? You're more fragile physically, so you need to be more careful. But in the modern world,
Which is a fire hose of information.
a fire hose of cognitive overload, it's nothing but noise. So if your biological hardware has a reduced tolerance for that noise, which happens as we age, and the world keeps getting noisier, the world literally starts to feel physically hostile to you.
Not because it's out to get you, but because your nervous system is just stuck.
It's stuck in hazard detection mode, and then you throw in physical factors, chronic inflammation, sleep disturbance. If you're chronically tired and inflamed, you are biologically primed for irritability and negative bias. So what looks like a philosophical stance on the decline of the West might actually be, 50% just physiological fatigue.
That brings a lot of empathy to it for me. It's not just someone choosing to be difficult. They're navigating a world that physically feels uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But, and this is a huge but, there is an entire industry that knows this. They know about the biology and they are ready to exploit it.
The political incentive structure. Yeah, this is the feedback loop from hell.
We all know fear sells. It's marketing 101.
Yeah.
But the profile suggests this goes deeper than just selling ads. It's about actually rewiring the brain.
It is. I mean, cognitive science tells us that repeated exposure to danger cues enlarges the amygdala, the brain's fear center, and makes it more reactive. So if you sit a person with this vigilant biology in front of a 24-hour news cycle or a doom-scrolling algorithm, you are basically training their brain to hunt for threats.
You're reinforcing the glitch. You're taking that natural threat salience and putting it on steroids.
You're weaponizing it, and this is where we get the bogeyman. The source lists a whole menu of them: the elites, the immigrants, the corporations, the youth.
And notice that list covers the whole political spectrum.
Yeah.
The source is very clear. This isn't a right-wing thing or a left-wing thing.
No, it's a doomer thing. It doesn't matter who the villain is. What matters is the narrative coherence it provides. The doomer needs an adversary.
Why, though? Why do they need a bad guy so badly? Why not just accept that things are complicated?
Because it's easier to fear a villain than to tolerate ambiguity. That's the core of it. If there's a globalist or a fascist pulling the strings, then the chaos makes sense.
Right. Someone is causing it. It's a plot. It's a story.
And if there's a plot, there's a solution, right?
Yeah.
Defeat the villain. But if there's no villain, if the world is just random and changing and indifferent to you, that's terrifying.
So suspicion feels clarifying.
And fear feels purposeful. It gives you an identity. You're not just an old person confused by technology. You're the watchman on the parapet. You're a sentinel protecting civilization. It elevates their anxiety into a mission.
Okay, now this leads to what I think is maybe the most fascinating part of the whole source, the spiritual dimension. Dr. Overby calls it the desacralized apocalypse, which sounds heavy.
It is, but it's a brilliant insight. He points out that this generation was, for the most part, raised with traditional religious narratives. Whether they were devout or not, the culture was just steeped in these stories of cosmic battles, good versus evil, end times.
Even if they don't go to church anymore.
Even if they're total atheists now. The structure of the story remains in their mind. The scaffolding is still there, even if the building is gone, so the apocalypse just becomes secularized.
How does that work?
Well, instead of Satan, you have the system. Instead of the tribulation, you have societal collapse. Instead of the Antichrist, you have whoever the opposing political leader is. They're still living out this religious drama, but they've just dragged it into the political arena.
And the source says, this shifts their mindset from stewardship to siege. That feels like a critical pivot.
It's the difference between planting a tree and building a bunker. If you believe the world is something to be stewarded, you care for it. You make long-term plans. But if you believe you're under siege, that the end is near, You shift into survival mode. You hoard. You
You
defend.
stop trying to fix the future because you've already decided it's doomed.
And honestly, if you view the world as a siege, having a bogeyman is actually spiritually useful. It keeps the moral drama alive. It makes you the hero again. And Dr. Overbeek adds a little sting to the tale here. He says, if there is no enemy, then maybe the decline isn't inevitable. And if it's not inevitable, then maybe the responsibility for the state of the world lies a little closer to home.
Oof, that's a very uncomfortable thought.
It is. It's much easier to blame the barbarians at the gate than to look at the cracks in the foundation you helped build. It just transfers the blame outward.
So we've got biology, we've got politics, we've got this secular apocalypse, but Overbeek says there's one final deep layer at the psychological core.
Yep. He identifies 3 traits: high betrayal sensitivity, low ambiguity tolerance, and externalized blame. But the driver, the engine under it all, is grief.
Grief. That was the aha moment for me
Yeah.
reading this. Because we usually see rage, right? The all caps comments, the shouting. But the source says it's grief disguised as rage.
Well, think about it from their perspective. The doomer doesn't just feel scared, he feels cheated. The world he was promised, that high-trust, intelligible world we talked about at the beginning, it didn't arrive. The institutions fractured, the moral language shifted. All this technology he didn't ask for is dominating his life.
So he's mourning. He's mourning his status, his relevance.
His understanding of how things work, but, and this is the danger of unprocessed grief, it curdles into resentment. And resentment needs an object. You can't just be resentful at the universe. You need someone to blame.
So you invent the bogeyman to explain why the world changed. They took it from us.
Exactly. They are expressing loss, but it sounds like attack. And because it sounds like attack, the younger generations attack back, which only confirms the doomers' belief that the world really is hostile. It's a tragic cycle.
It really is. So that brings us to the big question. Is this terminal? I mean, if you're stuck in this loop, biological fear, political manipulation, unprocessed grief, is there a way out?
Dr. Overbeek is actually quite hopeful. He outlines a multi-level remedy. He doesn't think it's easy, but he thinks it's possible. And the first one is deceptively simple: rehumanization.
Proximity is the cure for abstraction.
That's the quote. Fear thrives at a distance. It's so easy to hate the radicals or the Maggie crowd as these abstract concepts on a screen. It's much, much harder to hate the actual family moving in down the street who brings you cookies.
Direct contact. Just. It interrupts the simple narrative.
It forces nuance. When the caricature becomes a neighbor, the whole fear structure starts to wobble. You realize, oh, they're not a soldier in a culture war, they're just a person. It deflates the balloon of the bogeyman.
It's hard to demonize someone when you're borrowing their lawnmower. I love that.
Right. Then there's what he calls cognitive discipline. This is about training your brain to resist that amygdala hijack. It involves asking one specific question: what would falsify my fear?
Oh, that's good. That's the scientific method, but for your own emotions.
It is. It introduces epistemic humility. Instead of looking for proof that you're right, which is confirmation bias, and the internet is great at that, you look for evidence you might be wrong. It forces the brain out of the threat detection loop and into the analysis loop.
It slows you down.
Exactly. And then there's the physical stuff. You can't think your way out of a biological problem. Physiological stabilization: sleep, sunlight, exercise. And crucially, less media exposure. You have to lower the volume on the danger cues to let your nervous system calm down. You can't reason with an inflamed nervous system. You have to rest it.
And then there's the grief work, which sounds like the hardest part.
It is. Overbeek says they have to name the loss. They have to actually admit, I miss being central to the culture. I miss feeling vital. I miss understanding the rules. Naming it stops the externalization.
You stop blaming the youth for your loss of relevance and start processing the natural passage of time.
Right. And speaking of the youth, there's one last remedy in the source that I found really beautiful: this idea of intergenerational exchange.
This was my favorite part.
It suggests this perfect symmetry. Young people often have optimism without memory. They think everything is possible because they haven't seen things fail yet.
And older people have memory without optimism. They've seen it all fail, so they think nothing is possible.
Exactly. And when they're isolated from each other, which is how most of our society is set up, both perspectives get distorted. The youth become naive, the elders become cynical. They need each other to correct that distortion.
That's a really powerful image. It turns the generation gap from a battlefield into a puzzle where the pieces actually fit together.
It does. It requires humility, but specifically for the boomer doer, it requires stepping down from the parapet. It requires rejoining the village.
So as we wrap this up, We started with that image of the sentinel,
Hmm.
the weather-worn watchman who never stood down. He thinks he's being wise.
But he has mistaken suspicion for wisdom. What he's really protecting is coherence. He's scared of chaos, so he creates a scary story because a scary story is stable and has a beginning, a middle, and a villain.
But stability purchased through fear is brittle.
It is. And that leaves us with Dr. Overbeek's final challenge. He says the remedy isn't just relaxation, it's courage. But not the courage of fighting a war, it's the courage of curiosity.
To admit the future might not be a catastrophe.
To admit that just because something is different doesn't mean it's corrupt. And to acknowledge that maybe some of the enemies out there are just projections of our own ungrieved loss.
That's a challenge to every generation, isn't it?
It is. Overbeek writes, every generation eventually faces the temptation to become a doomer. The task is to transcend it. Because if you lose hope, if you lose that ability to see the horizon as a sunrise rather than a storm, then the sentinel is just guarding an empty gate.
And there's nothing sadder than guarding an empty gate. That is a lot to think about. Thanks for walking us through this, and thank you for diving deep with us. We'll see you next time.